Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
You know, those thoughts really linger, and I almost feel like I'm drowning in them. You can't see the light. All you can see is darkness, and that's really hard.
What are those things that sort of put you on that path? And maybe what are those day-to-day things that you might do to just check in with yourself about how you're feeling about yourself?
I will never be a size 0 because there would, one, be nothing left of me and I would look super gaunt. But, you know, society would deem me as healthy because I'm thin, but thin doesn't equate to healthy.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday. The home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Monday. Thanks for all your downloads and your streams. Hello to everyone who's listening to the podcast through YouTube as well. Really great response on last week's edition. Owen from Race Across the World. Great to spend some time with him. And we have got another cracking edition of the podcast for you today with Henna Mistry as our special guest. Now, Henna's a brilliant talker and she's going to share her story. We're going to be talking about self-esteem. Now, well, I mean, 300 odd episodes into this podcast, I kind of feel like self-esteem is something we've talked about, but never really focused on in particular. And to me, that strikes me as a little bit odd because I kind of feel like self-esteem is a big part of how we feel about ourselves. So I've talked around it, but never directly about it. There's a new survey out from the BACP who found that 54% of women say their self-esteem impacts their day-to-day choices, such as what events to go to and whether to speak up at work. Really interesting. The self-esteem issues are often more experienced by women for the first time at around 10 years of age, while body image is the leading source of self-esteem issues for women, followed by social comparisons, career and professional life. Romantic relationships are in there too, but by far and away, body image is the main one. Now, the BACP have been working with the team at the Battersea Power Station, which has had a right old do-over if you've been down into that part of the world. Looks incredible now. But they did this event called Burst the Self-Doubt, where women were encouraged to write their sort of issues on a balloon, which was filled with paint, and then it was flung onto a canvas to create a piece of art, which was kind of created from the explosion of these women's self-esteem issues, which is a great idea and a great sort of representation about how you can kind of bottle it up and then try and release it and create something different with it. So it's great that the BACP are engaging with this as an issue. It's obviously something that they are seeing through their network of psychotherapists. And I'll put links to the BACP in the podcast notes. It's a good place to go to if you want to get started on looking for therapists and so on and so forth. But Henna's story is one from the grassroots, if you like. She's been through therapy, but as part of this conversation, talks about her journey, where those issues potentially came from, how she views those issues now, and most importantly, how do you deal with low self-esteem? How do you deal with self-esteem issues? How do you turn those thoughts that you have about yourself into something that you can work with, that you can run with, that you can turn into a positive? Now, Henna, as part of this conversation, mentions a couple of organisations that she's involved in. I'll get some links to them in the podcast notes as well. Also, where you can find out more information about the Burst the Self-Doubt campaign, and where you can also get some more information about the work of the BACP. But we started off by talking about self-esteem, what it is, how it impacts lives. This is Henna's story.
I think with self-esteem, I think it's about how we value and perceive ourselves. And there are so many things that it can be based on, whether it's opinion, whether it's beliefs about ourselves. And sometimes I feel like it can be really difficult to change, especially if you've had a particular thought pattern or a negative self-talk spiral that's really hard to get out of. So I think self-esteem is almost easy to go down that rabbit hole, but slightly harder to come out. It takes quite a bit of work.
You feel like self-esteem is about feeling good in your own skin, and sort of being able to almost look at yourself in the mirror and kind of go, yeah, I'm happy with where I am. And if that is the case, what are those challenges that women face, do you think, when it comes to just feeling good about yourself? There's no reason why you shouldn't feel good about yourself. You're getting up every day, you're putting yourself out there, but yet we all have these sort of challenges that we're facing. What are those challenges for you that really stand out?
So I think with self-esteem, it's not just about body image and the way that we look. I think, it can be to do with our relationships, whether it's with partners, friends, family. It can be the relationship with ourselves. It can be work as well, feeling worthy in the workplace and imposter syndrome, which, a lot of people suffer from. So yeah, in terms of self-esteem, I think there's like many strands, but I do think, there is a high percentage of women, especially, who suffer with body image as part of their low self-esteem. And I think in terms of the challenges that women face to be almost feel good enough in their own skin, I think there's so many different things and so many different strands to that. So I think one of the key things for me, especially, and when I spoke about it with my friends, it's social media, because there's so many good things about social media. It's great for keeping in touch with people, long distance friends and family, ideas for recipes or, outfits. But with social media, we only let people see the best version of ourselves. So, often if there's a picture being taken of me, there's about 20, 30 pictures being taken. And I'm like, oh, I don't like that. I've got a double chin in that. My face looks weird to that. My eyes closed in that. And we put the best picture on social media, or the best version of ourselves on social media. And it's, it's really curated. So that little snapshot that you see of someone isn't necessarily real life. And it really does skew, I think, your perception of reality as well. So you're not thinking, oh, well, they use the best lighting and they position their body in this way, or they wore this particular outfit on purpose. That doesn't necessarily go through your mind when you're instantly looking at it. When maybe if you take a step back, yes, definitely. But in that moment, that's not what you're thinking. And, they say that comparison is the thief of joy. And it is so true. And I think it's fairly common, on odd occasions to compare yourself. But when you suffer from low self-esteem, and from my own experience, those thoughts really linger. And I almost feel like I'm drowning in them. And you can't see the light. All you can see is darkness. And that's really hard, because you end up spiraling. And I think a lot of people could potentially relate to that. So, I look at pictures and videos of different people and I think, God, they're more attractive than me. They have a nicer body. I need to lose weight. I wish I looked like that. They're more successful. God, they're so articulate and charismatic. They earn more money than me. Gosh, they're so productive. Look at all the things that they do in a day and I'm not. And that is really hard, because like I said, in that snapshot, you don't think about the curation or how many hours it's taken for them to do X, Y, and Z. And I think that's really important to remember. So I definitely think social media is definitely a challenge. And also with social media as well, people have more access to it. You can publicly give your opinions or criticize someone or be controversial without having that consequence. Like, what is the consequence for being mean to someone? I mean, it doesn't affect you, but it affects the person that you've been mean to, and they don't care about that. So, when you hear and read those comments that those trolls or whoever have said, it can really make you doubt yourself and feed into your insecurities, whether they're old ones or new ones that have just been created by these people that have left nasty comments. So yeah, I think social media is a big one. I think unrealistic beauty standards as well. So for women, there's such a large focus on what we look like and how that's linked to our self-worth. I grew up in the 90s and 2000s, and then it was all about being thin, about being size 0, having a flat stomach. And then we went into this Kardashian era, and it was about having fuller lips and small waists and, big bombs on that sort of like BBL look. And then, in the last, not even year, we've done a complete 360 and we've gone back to heroin chic and then added on Ozempic that, celebrities and influencers have taken on top of that. And it's really just unattainable. It's unattainable for women to keep up with this, because I will never be a size 0, because there would, one, be nothing left of me and I would look super gaunt and unhealthy. But, society would deem me as healthy because I'm thin, but thin doesn't equate to healthy. And, being in a larger body, that doesn't equate to being unhealthy either. Everyone's different. And I think people want you to put you in boxes and label you. And, it affects men, I'm sure, as well. But as my experience as a woman, I think for me, from my experience, it it's really hard. I can't keep up. It's unattainable. And obviously fashions and trends change, and that, that happens, it's fine. But it almost feels like it's not okay to be ourselves, and we're not enough just being the way that we are. We have to change something. So, whether you choose to have cosmetic surgery and have fillers and Botox, but then if you don't have it, or whether you dye your hair or just let your hair go grey, and there always seems to be a wrong choice, because if we don't dye our hair and go grey for women, we're letting ourselves go. If we have Botox and filler, etc., we look fake, or we're trying to stay young and, keep up with the younger generations and, give that facade that, no one ages and we just look perfect all the time. And it kind of feels like, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and it just feels like it's either too much or too little, and the just right just doesn't feel like it exists at the moment. And I think no wonder people are affected with their self-esteem, because how do you keep up with all of that?
I think it's such an interesting answer. There's so much to that, and actually, it's really interesting that the comparison between sort of back in the day and now. Social media is such a huge thing. And I think back in the day when it was like the beauty magazines, and there was a lot of like comeback on that because people didn't know what Photoshop was. So when they saw that body, they thought that was just the body, and then those unachievable goals were there. And beauty magazines took a lot of stick. And social media came in, but then people became aware that there were filters and that there were things that people were doing. And yet, the core of some of those arguments haven't really changed. That even though we know that these people have got teams around them, and they've got access to even greater, Photoshopping expertise, those images will still be out there, and people will still compare themselves to them, even though they know they're not natural. Rather than, as you said before, just be healthy in your own body and feel good about yourself. And that's why, I don't know about you, but social media, I feel like we've just absorbed the whole thing into our lives to take the good from it, but the bad is really radiating out quite a lot, and it's creating these situations.
I agree, and I think you think it's bad for millennial women, and then I left teaching last August, and I taught 11 to 18-year-olds, and they are so absorbed and consumed by it. It's actually quite scary. And I've got 13-year-old girls saying to me, "Oh, I need to have Botox, and I want to get my nose done because my noses are perfect." And at the moment, the fashion is to have, that sort of like pixie sort of uplifted, curved. And, if you have, God forbid you have a bump or a slightly bigger nose. It's sad. It makes me sad that not only am I part of this, statistic from the BACP, where they said that 49% of women suffer with self-esteem issues, and to be part of that statistic, and then knowing that there are younger children out there who are, taking this social media world and thinking that is reality when we know it's not. But if you're seeing it enough, if someone tells you something or you see something often enough, you believe it, right? And, that's how I should look, and that's how I should behave, and this is what my life should look like. So I do think there are so many great things about social media. I'm not knocking it at all, but, it's not regulated. So, for example, TikTok is not regulated as well as, say, I don't know, Instagram as an example.
But as you make the point, it is great for recipes, and long may that continue as well. Let me ask you a question. You mentioned it, imposter syndrome. Now, just before I ask you this question, I'm going to tell you this, that I am a 42-year-old bloke who has worked in an industry now for more than 20 years, and I've done okay from it. Like, I've had a good time. I've had a successful career so far. Who knows how long that might last? But I have a recurring dream where I'm at uni and I'm going to fail my course. I'm going to fail my course because there's a course that I haven't been going to, which I knew about, and I just haven't done the work. And it's a constant, I probably have that dream twice a week, most weeks. I've not had it for a couple of weeks now, actually, but whenever there's any kind of stress, and it's born out of the imposter syndrome that I have, that at some point someone's going to find out that I'm not even qualified to do this job, and the whole thing's been a massive, like, imposter syndrome affects different people different ways. Can I ask you, how has imposter syndrome affected your life?
oh God, where do I even start? I can relate to that. I mean, for me, it's not the bad dreams. It's more like in the moment and then taking it home and sort of like overthinking. But I think I mentioned before that I was a teacher, and I definitely felt it even before that. So even as a child at school and still now, I think in teaching in particular, I think sometimes I never felt like I was a good enough teacher, and I didn't feel like I was doing enough or well enough, or I should be doing more. And I was working well over 70 hours a week, and that's not what I'm getting paid for. But I was doing it, one, because I cared, but doing all of that, working the hours that I was doing, plus that sort of like self-loathing as well, it just had such a big impact on my private life and social life. And looking back and, you know, speaking to friends and colleagues in the teaching profession who have worked with me, I know I was a good teacher. You know, I can look back a year on and be like, you know, I was a good teacher. I did really care about the staff, about the children, about the school, you know, about the parents. I was passionate. I supported other teachers. You know, I did stuff in my subject area and or pastorally as well. You know, I did a lot. But at the time, I was comparing myself, and it was awful. So it definitely impacted me, yeah, socially and in terms of work as well. And I think it's held me back sometimes as well. So there's been jobs that I've seen post-teaching, or even whilst I was teaching, sort of like promotions as well. And I've not applied for a job because I've looked at the job specification. Although I've been interested, I've been convinced that I'm not going to get shortlisted because I'm not good enough, or my application's not going to be good enough, or yeah, they're going to know that I don't fit their criteria 100%. And I think actually I saw a statistic somewhere that how much of the job specification that men will match before they apply for a job is, I think, about 60% of the qualifications or the job specification, but women only apply if they meet 100%. I mean, if that doesn't say it all, I don't know what will. And that sort of encapsulates what I have done throughout my career and working life, because it that lack of self-esteem and imposter syndrome, thinking I'm not enough, has not only fed into like my appearance and body issues, it's then fed into careers where I have been absolutely capable and excelled at a job, but even then that imposter syndrome's held me back.
I was going to ask you about that because according to the BACP survey says that body image is the number one cause of a self-esteem issue. But actually, from what you've said there, it has this insidious nature of, it starts with body image, but then it creeps into those other, the social comparisons, the professional life, and those sorts of things. That actually it starts out with looking at yourself, but then actually it becomes, well, what is my place in this world? What is my place within the workplace? I guess that's when it becomes problematic, because it then holds you back, doesn't it? Because it means you don't maybe apply for the job, which means you don't take a salary or an opportunity which might enhance your life in a different way.
Yeah. And sometimes you're your own worst enemy, but at the time you don't think that's the beauty of hindsight, and, you know, things that help you, like talking to your friends or therapy, etc. But at the time, that's, you know, you don't think about that stuff. So it's not just body image. It's not just about your professional life. I think it can feed into relationships. And I've definitely had that as well. Like, I've been with my boyfriend for 9 years, and it's less so now, but I have definitely felt massive waves of, you know, feeling unworthy and focusing on what my shortcomings are and doubting whether he liked me or loved me, and sort of expecting the worst, and, you know, thinking he's going to, you know, leave me for someone better, you know, more attractive, thinner, more intelligent. And that's horrible. That's horrible to, you know, think that you are not worthy of someone. And a lot of that isn't, you know, related to my personality. Most of what I've just said is related to how I look. And, you know, I say something to my friends is that your appearance is the least interesting thing about you. because your body is your vessel, and obviously, you know, first impressions, but who you are is much more than just what you look like, because you could be beautiful, absolutely, you know, stunning, but you could be an awful person. You could be, you know, uncaring and, you know, unkind, selfish, you know, all these things, but you look beautiful. So, you know, it's fine, it'll get you far in life, but that's not necessarily true. And I think I have to, you know, and it is like a daily reminder for me that, you know, I am enough and everyone's enough. You know, it's just telling yourself that and believing it.
What did you do? What were those steps? What were those things that you took? And you took a bit an ongoing journey as well. What are those things that sort of put you on that path? And maybe what are those day-to-day things that you might do to just check in with yourself about how you're feeling about yourself?
So, yeah, like you said, it is a journey, and I'm no way cured or perfect by any means. And it can be a daily struggle. You know, some things will hit harder than others, depending on, you know, what I'm feeling particularly insecure about, and what has been highlighted. But I think one thing that really helped me, which I think you've touched upon as well, is talking about it. I think it still feels a little maybe uncomfortable or taboo to really open up and be vulnerable. I think it's slightly easier for women because I think we're slightly, you know, we're programmed slightly differently, and we like to, you know, flock together. Whereas men, I think it is harder for men, I think, to talk about how they may feel, because it you know, it's not deemed as masculine, or
it's not, well, yeah, it's not seen as the things that
yeah
do.
Yeah, exactly. So I do think, as a generalization, women tend to, you know, find it easy to meet with their friends and speak about it. And I think speaking about it and sharing and, you know, just getting it off your chest, because sometimes you're just in your own head, and that's no one knows what you're thinking, because outwardly I present to, I think, a lot of people as a very confident person. And in some ways, I absolutely am, but some of it is hidden under lots of layers to protect myself. So I think definitely talking about it and sharing and hearing other people be like, you know, actually I feel the same, or, you know, I suffer from self-esteem, but it's more so this than this, has really helped me, because it's made me feel like I'm not alone. I also had a friend a couple of years ago. She had mentioned that she'd been to therapy. And I think initially, sometimes, again, that conversation around therapy can sometimes feel a little uncomfortable. And I really had to sort of think about it and reflect and think, actually, maybe this is something I need to do and maybe it will help. So it took me a while to build up the courage, and I did some research to seek out a BACP registered therapist. And then I started my journey with therapy. So I've been going to therapy for a couple of years, and having firstly a sounding board that, you know, doesn't really know me, is completely non-judgmental, is who has perspective, and, you know, can really listen and take things on, because often you feel like you might be burdening other people, like with your friends or your family or your partner, whoever it is. You feel like you're burdening someone because everyone's got their own stuff going on. So having that designated time to talk to a therapist who is, you know, qualified, who is registered, it was sort of a peace of mind. I didn't really need to think about how I was coming across. If I wanted to be angry or if I wanted to cry, you know, there was no judgment there, and that was really nice. And I've been doing things out of my comfort zone as well. So one of the things that I really struggle with is, I think there's quite a lot. I think we've established there's quite a lot of things related to self-esteem that I suffer with. But I think the one thing that I have noticed is, you know, body image and appearance, and how I come across or how I look in photos and videos. I will absolutely avoid being in a video, being in a photo. If I scroll through my phone, there's photos of other people or scenery of various places, and I'm not in it. So I don't have those memories of me in that moment. So when the BACP reached out about their self-doubt campaign at Battersea Power Station, I was more than happy to go, more than happy to travel, more than happy to meet people, because that isn't outside of my comfort zone. But what is out of my comfort zone is the photos and the videos. I was also in an article in the York Press, and I did a reel about it, and I put all these photos of me from young to like now, and that was so out of my comfort zone, you know, being vulnerable, showing those photos, those videos, going down to Battersea, being on like interviews and photos and all on the day. That was completely out of my comfort zone. So, you know, they said you're going to throw a paint-filled balloon at a canvas, and people are going to video and watch. And I was absolutely terrified of that, but I did it, and I'm so proud of that. I did. So, you know, slowly I'm working up towards being in more photos, being in more videos, and being more present. And I think lastly, and this is like something that I try to do every day, is about sort of changing my mindset. And again, that takes time. There's no quick fix, but it's talking more kindly to myself, and using those strategies discussed in therapy when I found myself in a negative self-talk spiral. It's really easy to go down that rabbit hole, but having those strategies that I've learned at the back of my head in my toolkit to be like, right, why are you thinking like this? That doesn't even matter why you're thinking about it. What can we do to get you out of it? You know, what is the irrational thing that's going on? What is your projection? But having gone to therapy, having that toolkit, having those strategies, talking more kindly to myself, and being like, actually, this is a bit of a trigger for me. This is what I need to do. This is, you know, actually, I don't look hideous. You know, I don't look hideous. Just need a bit of dry shampoo in my hair, and that would probably make things a bit better. You know, you're not disgusting. You're not ugly. You know, you have bad days, but that's okay. You know, you can't look perfect all the time. And you have to just sort of talk more kindly to yourself, because I would never say to a friend, oh my God, he looks so fat and ugly. You just would never, ever say that to someone. So actually talking more kindly to myself and thinking, how would I speak to a stranger? How would I speak to my friend? How would I speak to my boyfriend? Why do I think that's acceptable to speak to myself like that? Because it's not.
In terms of sort of your journey, Henna, and what you've gone through and the sort of steps that you've taken, you obviously learned a lot in terms of dealing with things yourself and from your own point of view. What do you advise to other women, maybe women who are hearing this conversation and then think, you know, do I need to maybe take steps in this direction? Or I really relate to something that Henna said there. What could I do? What would you advise to people who are going through the similar situations, but through their own journey?
So I think it's really individual. You've got to be ready to do it. So if you want to talk about it to someone, if you want to seek therapy, you've got to be willing and wanting to do it. And, you know, I think it's really obvious, but I want to say therapy isn't a quick fix. You don't just go to 10 therapy sessions and you're cured and it's all good. That's just not how it works. You know, I said earlier, it's about, sometimes it's, you know, 10 steps forward, sometimes it's 2 steps back, and that's completely normal. And just how we work on our physical health, it's the same for our mental health. And, you know, self-esteem issues and self-doubt feeds into mental health. So, you know, you don't just do it for 10 sessions and you tick it off, it's done, it's off your list and you'll be fine and carry on. That's just not how it works. So I think, you know, you need to be ready, you need to be willing. And also, you know, it has to be financially viable for you as well. And it takes work, and you have to be willing to put that work in as well. Something I actually spoke to a friend about this earlier, about this podcast and why I was doing it and what we were talking about. And she actually shared with me a metaphor from her therapist and the way that she explained about self-esteem and those pattern of thoughts. And basically what she said was, the metaphor was that the brain works like it's a deep ravine, like the Grand Canyon, and it's been worn away by years of thinking in the same way. So for example, I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm unworthy, you know, I'm not pretty, etc. And then if you imagine that water flooding through, it's really, really difficult to divert that water down a different path, because that original path is just so entrenched. So you know, going back to what I said initially about it takes time, it's not linear, it takes a lot of work. Forging that other path, which might not be natural to you, because it's definitely not natural for me to be like, oh, I look nice today, I look pretty today, those nice things that maybe other people would say and I wouldn't say about myself is hard for me to say. But it can be done. It's like I said, it takes some work. So I definitely think I definitely think about that metaphor. I thought about it a lot today, and I wanted to share that as well. I definitely feel for women, if you're looking your area and you want to find a group of like-minded women, I run a community and a social group in York called York Girlies. And, initially this was set up for monthly events for women who were new to the area, who wanted to make friends or expand their social circle. But that has now turned from events into a community, a safe space for women to, be unapologetically themselves. This morning I was on a walk at 7 o'clock this morning, and we were discussing about self-esteem, and there'd been a death in someone's family, and we all got like a little bit upset. And I haven't known them for very long, maybe a couple of months, but it's a safe space for people to do that and to support each other as well. So, if you're based in York, if you're interested in York Girlies, there's such an excellent group run by a lady called Nilita in London, and that's called Worthy and More. So, looking at how you can change that pattern of thought, how you can work on your self-worth, and giving you some tools and strategies. She runs an excellent group. There's the London Girls Book Club run by Caitlin. Again, it's a book club, it's a social group, it's a safe space. At the moment, they've been talking about period power, which is obviously, really important for women, and looking at period tax and those books that are related to that, but then also talking about, periods, PCOS, endometriosis, stuff that feeds into that. And then we've got the Girls That Walk, that is run by Alice. And again, that's some partly to do with fitness, partly about moving your body in a healthy way. And again, that support system. So, finding a group of women or a group that you're comfortable with and going to, and finding that community, I think, to share, or even just listen to other people, and when you feel comfortable to share at the appropriate time, I think that's really powerful as well, to not feel alone. And I know we've talked about social media and how, sometimes we talk about it in a negative way because it can have an impact on self-esteem, etc. One person who I follow and who I absolutely love is Em Clarkson, and her podcast that she does with Alex Light, and it's called Should I Delete That? And basically that podcast explores the nuance that is often left out of like those polarizing conversations that take place on social media. And I found it's really helped with how I view content on social media now. And I think that's really powerful because it's like almost in some ways myth busting. And they have regular people that come on. So, whether they're an expert in a field or a celebrity or whoever it is. And, those topics of conversation are so important. And a lot of it is vulnerable. It's open. They're sharing their experiences and, that being relatable as well. So maybe if you're not comfortable sharing at the moment, or you don't want to go to therapy at the moment because you're not comfortable, you can't afford it, you're not ready yet, whatever that might be, and you want to listen to other people and just feel like you're not alone, that is an excellent podcast to also listen to as well.
There you go. Great recommendation. I tell you what, you just reminded me of something I read on social media once, and it was about, you talk about those ravines that are formed from messaging and things like that. There was someone who was saying that they played the Ugly Duckling in a school play, and at the point at which they became beautiful, another girl came on stage to replace her. So like the Ugly Duckling was one character, and it was all right, then you come off and then a girl comes out in a ballerina costume and she's the beautiful one, which must have been, as a core memory, that must have been horrendous to deal with. But it strikes me as well though, that the story of the Ugly Duckling, because sometimes when someone, we try and like have stories, don't we, to try and create those analogies. So if someone's worried about what they look like, they go, oh, the story of the Ugly Duckling. No one ever says, and it was never dealt with in the story itself, although Hans Christian Andersen isn't here to defend himself. The duckling wasn't ugly. It wasn't ugly in the first place. It was a swat. It was a cygnet. So although it didn't conform to what it was supposed to look like, it wasn't ugly in any way, shape, or form. But we go, oh, it's the ugly duckling, that transformational moment. You'll have that bit. Nobody has that transformational moment. Nobody has that bit where you suddenly become the swan. What it's about understanding is that the world around you didn't sort of recognize your beauty either internally or externally, and that you were hit with this label as a result of that. And that might be where you grew up, or what you looked like growing up, or what your social class was growing up. We kind of get told that, but actually they are all sort of self-imposed rules, particularly the story of the ugly duckling. It was the ugly duckling with a capital U, ugly. Look, zoom out a bit. Go and look at a baby swan. It's cute as anything. Baby swimming along there with its mum or its dad and all that. Amazing thing. But then when you talk about those ravines, if one of those just catches, if you talk about seeing the canyon, that's where the water starts to flow. And if the water starts to flow in it, it only gets deeper and deeper and deeper. I think that's a huge thing, isn't it? That we almost pick a label for ourselves, or within a friendship group. I'm the funny one. I'm the ugly one. I'm the fat one. I'm the thin one. I'm the sporty one. The Spice Girls came out in the mid-90s. The sporty one, the scary one. She wasn't scary at all. What was scary? What was scary about it? It was very the posh one. It wasn't posh. It was good.
The baby definitely wasn't a baby.
She definitely wasn't a baby. But we like to put a label on people and kind of, and then we do it to ourselves as well. Oh, I'm not the sort of person who does that. Or in the last few years I started running. I was never a sporty one, but I was like, well, if I'm going to get to 45 and be someone who runs, I'm going to have to be a 40-year-old who starts running. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you've got to change the narrative on yourself.
Yeah, I do think that's right. And I think it's interesting. It goes back to putting people in boxes and labeling people. And when that's, societal expectations, or whether that's you in your own head projecting, and actually what one person's, for example, ideal of beauty is completely different. And if you can go to different parts of the world and, they will consider you, beautiful, even if you think that's not what the ideal is, because it's different all across the world. So, yeah, I think that's really important to remember. And just because you think you're unworthy or, unintelligent, unarticulate, whatever it is that your self-esteem issue is, or insecurity, that doesn't mean it's true.
Absolutely. I was listening to a podcast. They were talking about I think it's Japanese tourists in London taking photos of dandelions, flowers. The yellow flower that comes from a dandelion.
Yeah.
Which is what? It's a weed, isn't it?
It's a weed, yeah.
If that appeared in your garden, you'd be like, oh, I'm going to have to dig those up. Or
get rid of that.
There we go. Well, and then we go, well, look at it. It's amazing. It's got look how many petals there are. Look at the shape of it. And it comes out out of the ground, out of nowhere. And I was thinking, oh yeah, it's like, that's a good point, that. But we've got this perception that, it's a weed, but somebody who doesn't know or doesn't, or their climate doesn't present them in that, would look at that and go, what an amazing thing that you've got these amazing plants that literally just grow out of grids everywhere. And oh yeah, and how many things within our life are potentially like the dandelion, which other people would look at and go, wow, that's absolutely incredible. But we've either put it into a box and put it on a shelf and thought, well, we already know about it, or we've just ignored it so much that we've not seen the value in it, and in it, the value in ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. And I think going back to what you said about environment as well. So originally I'm not from York, I'm from the Midlands. And although there is an Indian community in the town that I'm from, a lot of the schools I went to, I was one of few people of colour. So in the 90s and 2000s, a lot of my friends are pale-skinned, but fake tanning, blonde, poker straight hair, and I didn't look like that at all. and I didn't fit into that box. And then because you don't fit into that, you then feel unworthy. And then, you know, these insecurities creep in, and, you know, teenage boys can also be really mean, as well as teenage girls can be really bitchy, and that feeds into it. So I definitely think that a conversation about your environment, it definitely shapes you, and your family as well. You know, admittedly, I think they'll probably listen to this, my family, I've never spoken about how I actually feel. I mean, I'm talking about it to you, and I think, you know, just like therapy, it's a bit easier because we don't know each other, although people are going to listen to this. But I've never spoken about it with them because it's not something that we do. And I've never heard my dad be like, "Oh, I'm really proud of this about me," or my mom say, "Oh, I think I look really nice today." You know, that's not conversations that, maybe, I don't know whether it's just my family or other people as well, but we don't have those conversations. And I don't know why. I don't know whether it's, you know, we play things down so we look humble. You know, we're not bragging about, you know, a podcast that I've been invited on to, or the community that I run, or, you know, the award that I won for when I was teaching, you know, all these things that happen, the promotion, this, that. We always, you know, play things down. And then I also think by doing that feeds into self-esteem. I think you kind of do it without even realizing, because you're like, oh, I can't say this, and I shouldn't come across like I'm bragging. Well, you know, you have the right to be like, I've done something brilliant. You know, you're allowed to express that. And I think sometimes it feels like we shouldn't because of the fear of how people will perceive us. But you can change that narrative.
I think so. And I think that's the other thing, is that sometimes, and I don't know how your parents might react to that, but like, they might be absolutely mortified that you've got the perception that they don't care or haven't expressed, or they haven't expressed how they feel in a certain way. They might go, oh, goodness me, I was trying to do that, but I obviously haven't done it more overtly. Or they might go, oh, goodness me, yeah, I never realized the value that potentially could have, and I never expressed that enough. We're very guilty in this country, aren't we, of not saying anything to anyone for ages. And then when something terrible happens, like there's a funeral, you hear these amazing stories about the incredible things they did. And I've sat at funerals thinking, nobody ever told me this story. Like, what was, like, there was an amazing, it happens a lot with, you know, and I'm a football, so a football manager will die. And I know it was like the guy who was on the telly on Match of the Day or whatever, but they'll talk about how they revolutionized training, or all these amazing stories, which we have to wait for a reason to suddenly go, you know what, Henna, you are absolutely fantastic. You are absolutely brilliant. And it's an absolute joy to have you in our lives. And every single day I wake up and I think, good old Henna's cracking on, and she's doing these amazing things, and the girlies are successful. She's got that award thing. She's got all this stuff going on. I'm really proud she's on this podcast. We don't do them. We'll often think that in our heads, but we don't express that. And I think there's something about creating that space to say to someone, you are enough. It's great to see you today. How are you feeling? You look great. You look, even that thing where you go, someone who doesn't look great, or clearly looks like they're not in their best place because they've just got out of the shower and all that. But to say, like, busy morning, was it? Or have you just come from such and such to create that environment that at least acknowledges that the person is there in whatever state that they're. If I'm there and I'm just run to the school gates and I'm absolutely pouring with sweat and everyone just ignores me, I'd much rather someone come up and go, running late, were you? And I think it then acknowledges about, yeah, I am. That's why I'm a big sweaty mess, and I'm, you know, and I don't know, I've, you know, got odd shoes on or something like that. If nobody says anything, I just feel like, who's that? Like, who's the you know, the guy who's just showed up sweating with odd shoes on? It's just a weird. That acknowledgement's so important, isn't it? Because it allows you to frame yourself within your environment. You mentioned it's. I've read a lot recently about you. Have you heard about third place theory, which is this idea that generationally, our parents had three places. So they were at home, there was work, but then there was a third place. And sometimes it was like a religious thing. So it was like a church thing, or it was a social thing, or it was like a pub thing or a football thing. But actually a new generation has come through. who haven't automatically adopted the same third place that their parents have. So some people's lives are work, home, and there isn't that third place that they can go to, which would give them perspective of both of those things. How's work at the moment? How's home life at the moment? You can't get perspective from one looking at the other because you don't get a 3D view. But having the third place, which is why things like, your girlies will be so great, because you can, in that third place, assess how am I getting on at home, or things are a bit of a bother at the moment, or like cost of living is a real problem. Work's a bit of a stress in the moment, or I'm looking for a new opportunity. That third place gives you that vision to see your life in three dimensions, which is why those places, I think, and I believe, will continue to be really successful, because people will go, it's not what it is, it's the fact that it's there.
Although the third place makes sense, I've never thought about it that way. I've never heard about it, but actually talking about it and relating it to different communities or safe spaces or groups, it is actually really impactful. Whether I didn't start this community to think I'm making a difference or be impactful. It was more, I know what it feels like to move to different cities, whether it's within the UK or across the world. And I know what it's like to be lonely. I don't want people to feel like that. And then it's turned into, something more. We don't always have deep conversations. Some of it will sometimes be surface level, but sometimes things come up and we talk about things and, we relate to things and people will chip in. And sometimes those people that you're not expecting to say stuff will say something and you're like, oh my gosh, you feel like that too? Why? But, we all have stuff going on. We all feel things, and your environment and your life experiences, it shapes who you are, which is part of your mental health, part of your self-esteem. So, these things will happen and you don't know what's going on behind closed doors or what has happened in their life up until that point for them to look or feel a certain way. So, yeah, I think that third place is really important. And I really hope that people can find these places. So, a good place to look. One of the things I did when I first moved to York was how to make friends in York. And, some things came up, but, there's the Meetup app, there's Facebook groups, there's the Click app as well. There's so many different forums, Bumble BFF and all these sorts of things that you can try and look for a third place. And sometimes you do have to do a bit of research depending on where you live. The bigger cities like London and Manchester, they will have more because there's more people. In York, there's a couple of us. So there's not just me. There's the Girls Club York as well, and then there's a few other meetup groups that are out there. Ladies Circle York. There's a few of us, and we're similar, but we're not the same. But it's I think it's a similar type of vibe. So yeah, that third place, I hope people can find. And I know we've talked about women because that's my lived experience as a woman, but I really hope that these third places come up for men as well, because like we said, it can be harder for men to express how they're feeling, and sort of communicate that, I'm having a bad day, or this is how I feel, or, I don't think I've ever heard my boyfriend talk down on his appearance, but whether that's because he's just confident in the way that he looks, or whether there are those insecurities and he's never voiced them, I don't know, and we've been together for 9 years. So I hope we can get to a point where it's not just women, it's men and anyone who, identifies, whether they're non-binary or part of the LGBTQIA plus community, all of us can, find a place that is that third place that allows us to be vulnerable, allows us to share, and allows us to feel like we're not alone. So, yeah.
Henna, we're out of time. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. I think you articulated amazingly your journey so far, and I think so many people will absolutely relate to the sort of things that you've been talking about. Fingers crossed people who are going through that get a sense from the conversation we've had today that they don't have to go through it alone. But thank you for your time, and thanks for joining us on Mental Health Monday.
No, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I really hope it helps. And people don't feel like they're alone, because I think to share this is so important. And, thank you for letting me be vulnerable in a safe space to, talk about this. So yeah, I really hope even if one person listens to it and be like, no, I actually really relate to that, and actually maybe I will try those things. So yeah, I really do hope it helps.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.